She meant to text her mom that he broke her arm, but autocorrect sent it to a stranger instead. The Vampire King read those 4 words on his phone during a council meeting and stood without a word. What no one knew, he'd been tracking her bloodline for centuries, and the moment she needed help, every ancient protection he'd sworn came roaring back. Now he's 3 blocks away, and she has no idea what's coming through her door. Maya Chen sat on the cold bathroom floor at 11:47 at night, with her right arm cradled against her chest and the bone beneath her elbow sitting at an angle that made her stomach turn every time she looked at it. The tile pressed into her legs through her jeans, and she could feel the chill seeping into her skin, but the pain in her arm was so sharp and consuming that everything else felt distant and unreal. Through the thin apartment door, she could hear Derek's voice rising and falling in that pattern she had come to recognize over the past 6 months, the apologetic tone that always preceded anger, the explanation that always turned into accusation. He was saying it was an accident, that he had just grabbed her too hard during their argument about the lease, about whose name should stay on it now that they were breaking up, about who had the right to keep the apartment they had shared for 2 years. Now please take a moment and subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from and what time is it. It is always fascinating to see where these stories get all around the world. Thank you. Maya closed her eyes and tried to focus on breathing through the pain, but Derek's voice kept bleeding through the door like water finding cracks in a foundation. She needed help, and she needed it now because the bone was definitely broken, and the way her fingers had gone numb and tingly meant something worse might be happening, nerve damage maybe, and she was alone in a locked bathroom with an ex-boyfriend who had just proven he was capable of more violence than she had ever imagined. Her phone sat on the edge of the sink, where she had managed to place it with her left hand, before sliding down to the floor, and she reached for it now, her vision blurring at the edges as a fresh wave of pain rolled through her arm. She unlocked the screen with shaking fingers and pulled up her messages, typing slowly and carefully with her left thumb because her right hand was useless. "He broke my arm. I need help." She meant to send it to Mom, to her mother who lived 40 minutes away in the suburbs, and who would call 911 and then drive over immediately, but her vision was swimming, and she did not notice when autocorrect changed the contact from Mom to Mom _1847, a number that had appeared in her contacts 3 weeks ago after her grandmother's funeral. She hit send and let the phone drop into her lap, closing her eyes again and pressing her head back against the bathroom cabinet. The funeral came back to her in flashes that felt more vivid than the present moment. Grandma May's sealed casket covered in white lilies, the small gathering of elderly women who had known her grandmother from church and the community center, and the lawyer in his gray suit who had pulled Maya aside after the service. He had handed her a small velvet box and said that her grandmother had left specific instructions, that Maya was to receive this when she turned 24, which had been just 2 weeks before Grandma May passed. Inside the box was a Victorian locket, tarnished silver with intricate scrollwork, and when Maya opened it, she found a photograph so old it looked like it might crumble if she breathed on it too hard. The photograph showed a man in 1847 formal wear, dark coat and high collar, standing beside a woman who looked so much like Maya that for a moment she thought someone had doctored an old photo as a joke. But the lawyer assured her it was authentic, that it had belonged to her great-great-great-grandmother Maylin Chen, and that Grandma May had wanted Maya to have it. Maya had put the locket on that day, and had not taken it off since, feeling the weight of it against her sternum like a secret she did not yet understand. Her phone buzzed in her lap and she opened her eyes, squinting at the screen. The message was from the Mom_1847 contact, and it said, "I'm on my way. Lock your bedroom door. Do not open it for anyone but me." Maya stared at the words, her pain-fogged brain trying to make sense of them. This had to be a wrong number, someone responding to a message meant for their own mother or daughter, but the tone was so specific and commanding that it made her skin prickle with something beyond fear. She should call 911 herself, should get actual help from actual authorities, but something about those words, the absolute certainty in them, made her believe that whoever had sent them was already moving, already coming, and that she needed to do exactly as they said. She pushed herself up from the floor using her left arm, biting back a cry as the movement jostled her broken right arm and stumbled out of the bathroom into her bedroom. Derek was still at the apartment door, his voice now fully shifted into anger, demanding that she open up, that they needed to talk about this, that she was overreacting. Maya turned the lock on her bedroom door with fingers that would not stop shaking, and then she sat down on the edge of her bed, still cradling her arm, and waited. The locket against her chest felt warm, warmer than it should be from just body heat, almost hot enough to be uncomfortable, and she touched it with her left hand, feeling the metal burn against her fingertips. 3 blocks away in the penthouse suite of the Ashford Tower, Lucian Ashford sat at the head of a long table surrounded by 5 elder vampires who were arguing about territory disputes with the werewolf clans. The meeting had been going on for 2 hours, and Lucian had said perhaps 10 words total, letting the elders debate among themselves while he listened and calculated outcomes. He barely tolerated these gatherings, barely tolerated the politics that seemed to consume so much of immortal existence, but as king he was required to at least appear engaged. His phone vibrated in the inner pocket of his coat, and he almost ignored it because he never checked his phone during council meetings. But something made him reach for it anyway, some instinct honed over centuries that told him when the world was about to shift beneath his feet. The screen showed a message notification, and when he opened it, he saw the name Maya Chen, a name he had been monitoring for 3 weeks, ever since her grandmother's death had triggered the bloodline alert he had set up decades ago. The bloodline monitor, disguised as a software update that had installed itself on her phone after Mei Lin's funeral, was designed to flag distress signals, and this message had every flag burning red. "He broke my arm. I need help." Lucian read the 4 words and something ancient and furious unfurled in his chest, something that had been sleeping for 178 years, suddenly roaring awake. The protection pact he had made with Mei Lin Chen in 1847, the blood oath he had sworn in exchange for her testimony that had saved him from vampire hunters, had just activated for the first time since her death. He stood without explanation, without even looking at the elders around the table, and the room went immediately silent, because Lucian Ashford never left negotiations, never walked away from council business, never showed emotion of any kind during these carefully controlled gatherings. Katerina, the eldest of the council members, spoke first. "Lucian, the werewolf emissary, arrives in 10 minutes. Her voice was sharp with disapproval, but Lucian was already moving toward the door, his coat billowing behind him. "Reschedule," he said, not looking back. Katerina stood, her chair scraping against the marble floor. "You cannot just leave in the middle of negotiations." Lucien turned then, and he let his eyes go completely black, let the full weight of his power show in a way he rarely did during council meetings. "I can. I am." The words came out flat and final, and the other elders shrank back because they recognized that tone, that look, the king asserting absolute authority. He did not wait for a response. He crossed to the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city and opened them, letting the night air rush into the climate-controlled room. He did not take the elevator because elevators were slow, and he needed to be there now, needed to reach her before whatever threat had broken her arm could do worse. He stepped through the window and dropped 40 stories, landing in the shadow of the building without a sound, his body absorbing the impact in a way that would have shattered human bones. 3 blocks. He could smell her blood from here, the distinct signature of Chen blood that he had memorized in 1847, sweet and iron-rich, with an undertone that was uniquely her bloodline. He moved through the streets faster than human eyes could track, a blur of shadow and purpose, and the rage in his chest grew hotter with every step because someone had hurt her, someone had broken the arm of a woman under his protection, and that was a violation of the oldest oath he had ever sworn. Maya heard footsteps in the hallway outside her apartment, and they were too measured to be Derek's angry stomping, too controlled and deliberate. A single knock sounded on her front door, Not the pounding Derek had been doing, but a knock so precise it sounded like a countdown, like someone giving a final warning. She heard Derek's voice, confused and aggressive. "Who the hell are you?" Then another voice, low and accented in a way Maya could not place. Older than old money. Older than anything she had heard before. "Leave. Now." Derek's response was exactly what she expected. The posturing and territorial aggression of a man who thought he owned the space he stood in. "This is my apartment too, asshole. Who do you think you are?" The sound that followed was brief and brutal, a thud, and then a gasp, and then silence. And then Derek's footsteps running down the hallway, running fast like he was fleeing for his life. Maya sat frozen on her bed, her broken arm throbbing in time with her heartbeat, and waited. The second knock came on her bedroom door, the same controlled rhythm, and then the voice. "Maya Chen. Open the door. I'm the one who texted you back." She should call the police, should scream for help, should do anything except open the door for a stranger who had just done something to Derek that made him run. But instead, she was staring at the locket around her neck, at the way it was burning hot against her skin, hot enough that she thought it might leave a mark. Her left hand moved to the lock before her brain could catch up with her body, turning the mechanism and pulling the door open. She stood there with her right arm hanging useless at her side and saw him for the first time. He was tall, easily 6 feet 3 inches, with dark hair that looked black in the dim hallway light and a tailored coat that seemed Victorian in cut but was clearly modern in construction, expensive fabric, and perfect seams. His eyes caught the light wrong, reflecting like an animal's eyes in headlights, and his face could have been 30 or 300, ageless in a way that made Maya's skin crawl. He was staring at her like he was seeing a ghost, like she was something impossible standing in front of him, and when he spoke his voice was rough with an emotion she could not name. "You look exactly like her." Maya felt dizzy, the pain in her arm and the strangeness of this moment combining to make the world tilt sideways. "Like who?" He stepped inside her bedroom without waiting for an invitation, moving past her with the fluid grace of something not quite human, and when he answered, his voice was softer, almost reverent. "Your great-great-great-grandmother, Mei Lin Chen. We had an arrangement." Maya's hand went to the locket, to the burning metal against her chest, and she thought about the photograph inside. The man in 1847 formal wear, standing beside a woman who looked exactly like her. She looked at the stranger in her bedroom, at his ageless face and reflecting eyes, and she understood with a clarity that cut through the pain that the man in the photograph and the man standing in front of her were the same person. That somehow, impossibly, he had not aged in 178 years, and that the arrangement he spoke of was about to change everything she thought she knew about the world. Lucien did not ask permission before he took Maya's right elbow in his hands, his touch clinical and surprisingly gentle for someone who moved with such controlled violence. His hands were room temperature, not warm like human skin should be, and Maya felt that wrongness register somewhere in the back of her mind even as the pain flared white-hot from his examination. He probed the break with precise movements, his fingers pressing against bone and swollen tissue, and Maya had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. "Spiral fracture," he said, his voice flat and diagnostic. He twisted while he pulled. His tone dropped then into something darker, something that made the air in the room feel heavier. "He meant to hurt you." Maya pulled her arm back, cradling it against her chest again, and the questions that had been building since she opened her bedroom door finally spilled out. "How did you get here so fast? Who are you?" Lucian straightened, his eyes still fixed on her arm, and when he answered, his voice was matter-of-fact in a way that made the impossible sound routine. "I'm someone your grandmother made sure could find you when you needed help. That locket you're wearing? It's a beacon. The moment you put it on 3 weeks ago, I knew exactly where you were." Maya's left hand went to the locket instinctively, feeling the metal still warm against her skin, and the implications of what he was saying crashed over her like cold water. He had been tracking her for 3 weeks, watching her, knowing where she was every moment of every day, and she had been completely unaware. The violation of it made her want to tear the locket off, but something stopped her. Some instinct that told her removing it now would be dangerous in ways she did not understand. An image flashed through her mind unbidden, not her own memory, but something the locket seemed to project directly into her consciousness. She saw a courtroom from another century, dark wood and high ceilings, and men in formal wear that belonged in history books. Mei Lin Chen stood before a magistrate, small and young and wearing the simple dress of a seamstress, and she was pointing at a group of men who held silver weapons that gleamed even in the dim courtroom light. Beside her stood Lucien in chains, his wrists bound in iron that looked too heavy for any normal restraint. And Mei Lin was speaking in halting English, telling the magistrate that these men had attacked her, that they had tried to kill her, that this man in chains had saved her life. It was a lie. Maya could see it in the set of Mei Lin's shoulders, in the way she would not meet Lucien's eyes, but the magistrate believed her. The men with silver weapons protested, but their protests sounded like the ranting of fanatics, and the magistrate ordered Lucien released. The image faded and Maya was back in her bedroom, staring at Lucien, understanding that what she had just seen was not imagination, but memory, something the locket carried and shared. She was supposed to be killed by vampire hunters who mistook her for my companion, Lucien said, and his voice was careful now, like he was choosing each word with precision. I intervened. She saved me in return by lying to human authorities. I swore a blood oath that I would protect her and her bloodline for as long as it continued. Maya's broken arm throbbed in time with her heartbeat, and the pain was making it hard to think clearly, but she understood enough to know that what he was describing was insane. That's insane, she said out loud. Vampire hunters? Blood oath? You're… She could not finish the sentence because finishing it would mean accepting that the impossible was real, that the man standing in her bedroom was something out of stories and nightmares. Yes, Lucien said simply, and then he let his eyes go fully black, not just the pupils, but the whites as well, until his eyes were two pools of darkness that reflected no light at all. His mouth opened, and fangs descended, long and sharp, and nothing like the costume fangs Maya had seen at Halloween parties. These were real, designed to tear and pierce. And Maya's vision tunneled as her brain tried to reject what her eyes were showing her. When Maya woke, she was on her couch and Lucien was standing by the window looking out at the street below, his phone pressed to his ear. Dr. Samir, he was saying, I need you at the Evergreen Apartments, Unit 408. Spiral fracture human, Chen bloodline, 10 minutes. He hung up without waiting for a response and slipped the phone back into his coat pocket. Maya tried to sit up, and the movement sent fresh pain shooting through her arm, and Lucien turned at the sound of her sharp intake of breath. You fainted, he said, as if that explained everything. Maya looked at him, at his coat hanging open to reveal a shirt that probably cost more than her rent, and the edge of something metallic tucked into an inner pocket. Something that looked like a weapon. You're really a vampire, she said, and it was not a question this time, but a statement of fact that she was trying to force herself to accept. The word is reductive but accurate enough, Lucien replied without turning back to face her. He continued to look out the window like he was watching for something, and Maya felt anger cut through her pain and fear. And you've been watching me? For 3 weeks? Now he did turn, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. For longer than that. I've tracked your family since Mei Lin's death in 1892. Every generation. Your grandmother knew. She kept you hidden until now. I don't know why. The casual way he said it, like surveillance across generations was normal and expected, made Maya want to scream. But before she could respond, he continued, his voice taking on a lecturing quality, like he was explaining rules she should already know. The blood oath has a proximity clause. If a Chen is in mortal danger, and I'm aware of it, I must respond immediately or the pact breaks and kills me. Your text activated it. I had no choice. Maya stared at him as understanding crystallized into something sharp and bitter. So you didn't come to help me, she said. You came to save yourself. Lucian's eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw something that might have been regret or might have been calculation cross his face. Both can be true, he said quietly. Before Maya could process that response, there was a knock at her apartment door, the same controlled rhythm Lucian had used, and he moved to answer it without asking her permission. A man entered, older than Lucian in appearance, maybe 60, with dark skin and silver hair, and an accent Maya thought might be Middle Eastern when he spoke. Dr. Samir, he said by way of introduction, and then he was kneeling beside the couch with a leather medical bag that looked antique. He examined Maya's arm with the same clinical precision Lucian had used, and when he looked up at Lucian, his expression was grim. Spiral fracture, clean break, but there's soft tissue damage. I'll need to set it. Maya opened her mouth to ask about pain medication, but Dr. Samir was already gripping her arm. And then he twisted and pulled, and the pain was so intense that Maya screamed, a sound that tore from her throat and left her gasping. Dr. Samir worked quickly, wrapping her arm in what looked like a normal cast, but felt different, heavier somehow, reinforced with something she could not identify. He pulled a small vial from his bag, dark liquid that smelled like iron and roses, and handed it to her. Drink this. It'll help with the clotting and reduce inflammation. Maya took the vial with shaking fingers and drank, the liquid coating her throat with a taste that was metallic and sweet and wrong. Dr. Samir packed his bag and stood looking at Lucienne. She'll heal faster than normal humans. Maylin's blood is strong in this one. Then he was gone, letting himself out as quietly as he had arrived, and Maya was left alone with Lucian again, her arm throbbing in its cast, and the taste of whatever she had drunk still lingering on her tongue. The pounding on her apartment door started 20 minutes later, and Maya recognized Derek's voice immediately. Louder now, and backed by other male voices she did not recognize. He was shouting about squatters' rights and his lease, and calling the cops if whoever was in there did not open the door right now. Lucian looked at Maya, his expression unreadable. Do you want him gone permanently or temporarily? The question was asked so casually that it took Maya a moment to understand what he was really asking, and when she did, horror flooded through her. You can't kill him, she said, and her voice came out higher than she intended. Lucienne's mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. I wasn't offering to, but I can make sure he never comes near you again. The question is whether you want him to remember why. Maya thought about Derek, about the way he had grabbed her arm during their argument, about the sound of bone breaking, and she felt something cold settle in her chest. Just make him leave, she said. I don't care how. Lucian crossed to the door and opened it, and Derek was there with two of his friends, one of them holding a baseball bat like he thought he might need it. Derek's face was red with anger and maybe fear, and he started to say something aggressive and territorial, but Lucian spoke first. 3 words in a language Maya had never heard, syllables that sounded ancient and wrong. Derek's face went blank, completely expressionless, and the anger drained out of his posture like water from a broken glass. He dropped the baseball bat and it clattered on the floor, and then he turned and walked away down the hallway with his 2 friends following like puppets on strings, their movements synchronized and unnatural. Lucian closed the door and locked it. And Maya found she was shaking, trembling so hard her teeth chattered. What did you do? Compulsion, Lucienne said, moving back to the window. A suggestion he'll believe is his own idea. By tomorrow he'll think breaking up with you was his plan all along. He'll move out by the weekend. He said it like it was simple magic, like rewriting someone's thoughts and memories was as easy as sending a text message. Maya wrapped her good arm around herself, trying to stop the shaking, and Lucian continued speaking, his tone shifting to something more serious. But compulsion leaves a trace. If any vampire in the city checks him, they'll know I was here. They'll know I used power to protect a human. Maya's mouth was dry and the room felt too small, too warm despite the November cold outside. "Is that bad?" she asked, and she hated how small her voice sounded. Lucien was quiet for a long moment, his eyes still fixed on the street below, and when he answered, his voice was careful. "It's complicated." Maya wanted to demand a better answer than that, wanted to know exactly what kind of danger she had just been pulled into. But exhaustion was crashing over her in waves, and the pain medication or blood supplement or whatever Dr. Samir had given her was making her thoughts fuzzy at the edges. She leaned back against the couch cushions and closed her eyes, and she felt rather than saw Lucien turn to look at her. "You should rest," he said. "I'll stay until morning. Make sure no one else comes looking for you." Maya wanted to argue, wanted to tell him to leave, wanted to process everything that had happened in the last 2 hours. But her body had other ideas. Sleep pulled at her like an undertow, and she let it take her, the last thing she registered being the weight of the locket against her chest, and the sensation of being watched by eyes that had seen centuries pass, and still remembered every detail of a promise made in 1847. When she woke, the sky outside her window was gray with early dawn, and Lucien was exactly where he had been when she fell asleep, standing by the window like a statue, like something that did not need rest or sleep or any of the things that made someone human. He turned when she stirred and his expression was unreadable. "We need to talk about what happens next," he said, and Maya knew from his tone that whatever came next was going to be worse than anything that had come before. Katerina stood in her office on the 63rd floor of the Ashford Tower. The city spread below her like a circuit board of lights and lives, and watched the blood-tracking specialist adjust the projection map that floated in the air between them. The map showed the city in 3 dimensions, rendered in blue light, and scattered across it were glowing points in different colors that marked vampire signatures throughout the metropolitan area. The specialist was a thin vampire named Nikolai, who had been doing this work for the council for 200 years, and his fingers moved through the holographic display with practiced ease as he isolated signatures and tracked their movements. Most of the points were green, indicating vampires going about their normal business, but one point near the eastern edge of the map glowed red, and it was not where it was supposed to be. Katerina leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "That's Lucien's signature," Nikolai confirmed, and he expanded that section of the map until they could see the specific building, a mid-rise apartment complex called the Evergreen. "He left the werewolf negotiation at 11:47 last night. He's been at this location ever since." Katerina's jaw tightened because Lucien missing the werewolf negotiation was not just irregular, it was unprecedented. He had been the council's primary liaison with the Pact territories for 15 years. And he did not miss meetings, did not break protocol, did not do anything that might suggest divided loyalties. She straightened and turned to face Nikolai directly. "He left the werewolf negotiation for a human?" Nikolai pulled up additional data, symbols and text that Katerina recognized as bloodline markers. Genealogical information that the council kept on all humans who had historical connections to vampire society. "Not just any human," Nikolai said, and his voice carried a note of something that might have been concern. "Chen bloodline, the same family he swore the 1847 pact to." Katerina felt something cold settle in her chest because she knew about the pact, had read the records when Lucien first joined the council, but she had assumed, like everyone else, that it had faded with time. Blood oaths were supposed to weaken across generations, diluted by genetic distance and the passage of years, until they became nothing more than historical footnotes. That pact should have dissolved generations ago, she said, but even as she spoke, she knew she was wrong. Nikolai was already shaking his head. "It's a blood oath, Katerina. Those don't dissolve. They transfer." The weight of what he was saying hit her like a physical blow, because blood oaths were considered archaic in modern vampire society, relics of a time when vampires operated by codes of honor that no longer applied to the complexities of the 21st century. More than that, they were dangerous precisely because they could not be broken or bargained with. They created leverage, vulnerabilities that could be exploited, And if the council discovered that one of their most valuable operatives was bound by unbreakable law to protect a human, that human became a weapon that could be used against him. Katerina moved to her desk and pulled up Lucien's file, scanning through his history, his assignments, his psychological evaluations. She had always known he was disciplined to the point of rigidity, but she had interpreted that as strength. Now she wondered if it was compensation, a way of controlling something he could not afford to let slip. "We observe," Katerina said finally, closing the file and looking back at the map where Lucien's red signature still glowed at the Evergreen Apartments. "Don't interfere yet, but if he's compromised, we'll need to invoke Article 7. Nikolai went very still because Article 7 was not invoked lightly. It was a council law that allowed them to nullify a vampire's autonomy entirely if that vampire was deemed a security risk to vampire society as a whole, to place them under full council control until the risk was eliminated or the vampire was destroyed. It had not been used in over a century, not since a vampire in Prague had formed an attachment to a human resistance leader during World War II and nearly exposed their entire European network. The fact that Katerina was even mentioning it meant she considered Lucien's situation potentially catastrophic. Nikolai nodded slowly and made a note in his records. "I'll maintain surveillance and report any changes." Katerina dismissed him with a gesture and turned back to the window, her mind already running through scenarios and contingencies. If Lucien was truly bound to this human, if the pact was as strong as the record suggested, then he would choose her over the council when forced to make that choice. He would have no option, and that made him the most dangerous kind of liability, the kind who could not be reasoned with or threatened into compliance. She would need to move carefully, gather more information before making any decisions, but she was already certain of one thing. This situation would not resolve itself cleanly, and blood would be spilled before it was done. Maya woke to morning light filtering through her bedroom window and the immediate awareness that something was wrong. Her arm throbbed in its cast, a steady pulse of pain that brought the previous night flooding back in fragmented images. Derek's attack, Lucien's arrival, Dr. Samir's brutal efficiency, the taste of iron and roses. She sat up slowly and looked toward her living room, and Lucien was exactly where he had been when she fell asleep, sitting in the chair by her window, his posture so still he might have been a statue. The morning light made his skin look paler somehow, almost translucent. And Maya realized with a jolt that he had not moved in hours, had not slept, had not done any of the small unconscious movements that living things did. He did not blink as often as humans. His chest rose and fell, but the rhythm was too slow, too regular, like breathing was a habit rather than a necessity. Maya stood and moved into the living room, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders, and Lucien's eyes tracked her movement, but he did not turn his head. "Do you even need to be here?" she asked, and her voice came out rougher than she intended. "The pact thing worked. I'm safe now." Lucien was quiet for a long moment, and then he did turn to look at her, his dark eyes unreadable. "The pact doesn't end when the immediate danger passes. It ends when you're no longer in danger. And you are." Maya felt frustration cut through her exhaustion because nothing about this made sense. None of the rules or obligations or ancient promises that seemed to govern Lucien's existence. From who? Derek's gone. Lucien stood in one smooth motion that was too fast to be natural, and he crossed to stand near her, but not close enough to be threatening. "From what I just revealed by coming here." Maya pulled the blanket tighter around herself and waited for him to explain. "By saving you publicly," Lucien continued. "Neighbors heard. Derek saw me. Dr. Samir knows. I exposed the connection between us. Other vampires will investigate. Some will see you as leverage they can use against me. Others will see you as a liability that needs to be eliminated." He moved past her to the mirror that hung on her living room wall, an old piece she had inherited from her grandmother, and he lifted his hand toward his reflection. Maya watched and saw something that made her breath catch. Lucien's reflection showed in the mirror, but it was delayed by a half-second, like video lag, his movements in the glass not quite matching his movements in the room. "We have rules, Maya," One of them is no attachments to humans that can be weaponized. I just broke it. The weight of what he was saying settled over Maya like cold water, and she understood then with perfect clarity that by asking for his help, by activating whatever ancient promise bound him to her family, she had not solved her problem with Derek, but had instead traded it for something infinitely more dangerous. So helping me put me in more danger, Maya said, and it was not a question. Yes, Lucien replied simply, and there was no apology in his voice, just statement of fact. He turned from the mirror to face her fully, and his expression was serious in a way that made Maya's heart rate spike. Which means you can't stay here. They'll come to verify the connection, and when they do, they'll test whether I'll choose you over the council. He paused and something shifted in his eyes, something that might have been resignation or determination. I will. Every time. Which is exactly what they'll use to destroy both of us. Maya wanted to argue, wanted to insist that this was insane, that she was not going to upend her entire life because of vampire politics she did not understand. But the look on Lucian's face stopped her. He was not exaggerating or manipulating. He was telling her the truth as he understood it. And that truth meant she was standing in the center of something that could kill her without even trying. She sat down on her couch, cradling her broken arm, and looked up at him. What are you saying? Lucien moved to lean against the wall near the window, putting distance between them again. I'm saying you have two choices. Stay here and become bait that they'll use to test my loyalty, or come with me to the Ashford Tower where I can protect you under guest right laws. Maya shook her head because the suggestion was absurd. I have a job, a life, I can't just disappear. Lucien's expression did not change. You texted for help, I answered. But help has a price, and the price is your cooperation until this is resolved. The bluntness of it made Maya angry, heat rising in her chest despite her fear. You're saying I don't have a choice. You have two choices, Lucien corrected. Neither of them is ideal, but both of them keep you alive. Stay here and hope the council decides you're not worth the political complications, or come with me and be protected by laws that even the council has to respect. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small iron key, old and tarnished, with decorative work that looked Victorian. He crossed to the couch and held it out to her. This opens a suite on the 40th floor of the Ashford Tower. It's warded against vampire entry. No one except me can enter without your permission. You'll be safer there than anywhere in the city. Maya took the key automatically and then froze as she registered what was etched into the handle. A family crest she recognized from her grandmother's papers. The Chen family symbol with its intertwined plum blossoms and crescent moon. Why do you have my family crest on your key? She asked, and her voice came out quieter than she intended. Lucian's expression shifted into something that might have been old pain. Because Mei Lin gave me this key in 1847. She was going to stay with me then, too. Until she changed her mind. The implications crashed over Maya like a wave, and she looked down at the key in her hand, at the worn iron that had been held by her ancestor over a century and a half ago. Her grandmother had mentioned Mei Lin in stories when Maya was young, described her as independent and stubborn and beautiful, but she had never mentioned vampires or blood oaths or relationships that spanned the gap between human and something else entirely. Maya thought about the locket around her neck, about the vision it had shown her of Mei Lin testifying before a magistrate, and she understood that her ancestor had been involved with Lucien in ways that went beyond a simple debt of honor, deeply involved. And she looks exactly like her, Maya realized, remembering what Lucien had said when he first saw her in the bedroom doorway. He had not just been protecting a stranger bound to him by ancient promise. He had been protecting someone who wore the face of a woman he had known, possibly cared for, possibly loved. The weight of that history pressed down on her, and Maya felt something in her chest tighten, because she was not Mei Lin, did not want to be a replacement or echo of someone else's story, but she also could not deny that she needed protection from threats she barely understood. She closed her hand around the key, feeling the metal warm against her palm. 1 week, she said. Then I'm going back to my life. Lucien's expression flickered with something Maya could not quite read, some emotion that passed too quickly to identify. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. 1 week. Maya nodded and stood, moving to her bedroom to pack a bag. And as she threw clothes and toiletries into her largest backpack, she tried not to think about what it meant that she was voluntarily moving into a vampire's tower, putting herself under the protection of something that was not human and never had been. She tried not to think about Mei Lin and what choices her ancestor had made in a different century, what promises she had broken or kept. She tried not to think about the fact that Lucian had admitted he would choose her over his own people, over the council that governed vampire society, and what that admission would cost both of them. But as she zipped her backpack closed and looked around her small apartment, at the life she had built through scholarships and night shifts and stubborn determination, not to let her family's poverty define her, Maya knew she was walking away from something she might never get back. She picked up the backpack and returned to the living room where Lucian waited by the door, patient and still and utterly inhuman in his patience. "Ready?" he asked. Maya nodded, even though she was not ready, would never be ready for what came next, and followed him out into the hallway where the morning sun was just beginning to burn through the November clouds. The locket was warm against her chest, and the key was heavy in her pocket, and Maya Chen walked toward the Ashford Tower, carrying the weight of a promise made 178 years ago by a woman whose face she wore like a mask. Lucien drove her in a black car that smelled like leather and old smoke, the kind of vehicle that was maintained so perfectly it seemed ageless. And Maya sat in the passenger seat watching the city slide past her window in streaks of light and shadow, while trying not to think about the fact that she was voluntarily isolating herself with a vampire who had just admitted he would choose her over his own people. The Ashford Tower rose ahead of them, like a shard of glass and steel piercing the night sky. All modern architecture and clean lines. But when they pulled into the underground garage and took a private elevator to the lobby, Maya saw that the building's exterior was deceptive. The lobby had marble floors that looked like they dated from the 1800s, veined with gold and worn smooth by more than a century of footsteps, and the walls were paneled in dark wood that smelled faintly of beeswax and thyme. A doorman in an old-fashioned uniform nodded to Lucian without speaking, his eyes sliding over Maya with the kind of careful non-recognition that suggested he had been trained not to notice or remember guests. And they crossed to another elevator. This one lined with mirrors that showed Maya's reflection, but showed Lucien's only after that strange half-second delay she had noticed in her apartment. The elevator rose in silence and Maya watched the floor numbers climb, 30, 35, 40, until the doors opened onto a hallway that was carpeted in deep burgundy and lit by wall sconces that flickered like actual flame, even though they had to be electric. Lucian led her to a door at the end of the hall and produced a second key identical to the one he had given her, turning it in a lock that clicked with mechanical precision, and then he stepped aside to let her enter first. The suite was nothing like Maya had expected, because she had been imagining something modern and cold, all glass and metal like the tower's exterior. But instead, she walked into a space that looked like it had been transported whole from another century. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. 40 floors of empty air between her and the streets below, and the view was dizzying in its scope, but the furniture inside was Victorian, all carved wood and velvet upholstery in shades of wine and forest green. There was a bed that looked genuinely antique, a four-poster with curtains that could be drawn for privacy, and a bathroom visible through an open door that contained a clawfoot tub deep enough to drown in. The walls were papered in a pattern of twisted vines and night-blooming flowers, and there were bookshelves filled with volumes in different languages, some of them so old the spines had cracked and faded to illegibility. But what caught Maya's attention most was the desk positioned near the windows, a heavy piece of furniture with brass fixtures and multiple drawers, and on its surface sat a stack of journals encased in glass boxes that protected them from air and touch. Maya moved toward the desk, as if pulled by invisible thread, and looked down at the journals, seeing dates written in faded ink on their covers. 1847, 1850, 1855. The handwriting was elegant, characters formed with careful precision in both Chinese and English, and Maya knew without being told that these were Mei Lin's journals, her ancestors' private thoughts preserved across nearly 2 centuries. "Don't leave this floor without me," Lucien said from behind her, his voice pulling her attention away from the journals. "Don't invite anyone in. If someone knocks and I'm not here, don't answer." Maya turned to look at him and saw that his expression was serious in a way that made her stomach tighten with anxiety. "How long are you staying?" she asked, suddenly aware that she was alone in a building full of vampires with only Lucian's protection standing between her and whatever tests or threats the council might devise. "I'm 3 doors down," Lucian replied, gesturing toward the hallway. "I'll know if you need me." Then he left, pulling the door shut behind him with a soft click, and Maya was alone in a suite that smelled like old books and furniture polish and something else she could not quite identify. Something that might have been the lingering scent of whoever had stayed here last. Maya spent the first hour exploring the suite like a prisoner, checking the dimensions of her cell, opening drawers and cabinets and finding them mostly empty except for basic supplies, towels and soap, and a few changes of clothes in sizes that would fit her. The clothes bothered her more than anything else because they suggested planning, that Lucian had prepared this space specifically for her or someone like her, and she did not know if that was thoughtful or presumptuous. She found a kitchen area with a refrigerator stocked with food that looked fresh, bread and cheese and fruit, and bottles of water, and she realized that someone must have prepared all of this within the last few hours, working quickly to make the suite habitable for a human guest. Eventually, she returned to the desk and the journals, unable to resist the pull of her ancestors' words, and she carefully opened the first glass case and lifted out the journal from 1847. The leather cover was soft with age, and the pages were yellowed but still intact, and Maya sat in the chair by the windows and began to read, her ancestors' handwriting flowing across the page in a mixture of languages that switched mid-sentence sometimes. Chinese characters giving way to English words when one language could express something the other could not. "Lucian Ashford saved my life tonight," the first entry read, dated 3 days after the court hearing Maya had seen in her locket vision. "The men with silver blades wanted to kill him. They nearly killed me instead. I lied for him in court. He swore a blood oath to me in return. I don't know if I should fear him or trust him." Maya read on, turning pages with careful fingers, and the entries painted a picture of a relationship that had developed slowly over years, meetings in Mei Lin's shop where she sold silk and tea imported from China, conversations that lasted hours and ranged over topics from poetry to politics to the nature of mortality. "He comes to my shop every month," an entry from 1850 said. "Brings me silk from places I'll never see. We talk. He listens like no man I've ever met. He listens like he has all the time in the world. I suppose he does." Maya felt something twist in her chest as she read, because she could hear Mei Lin's voice in these words, could sense the same wariness and attraction and stubborn independence that Maya recognized in herself. The later entries grew more conflicted, 1853 and 54 filled with entries about aging and time, and the impossibility of building something lasting with someone who would never change while she grew old. "I told him I can't stay," the final entry from 1855 read, and Maya could feel the weight of that decision in the careful formation of each character. "He's immortal, I'm not. I'll grow old and he'll watch. He said he doesn't care. I said I do. I gave him the key back. He said he'd keep it until someone in my line needed it again. I don't know if that's a promise or a curse." Maya closed the journal and sat in the darkness, the city lights below her window painting her face in shifting colors. And she understood with painful clarity that she was not the first Chen woman to sit in this room and wrestle with the implications of being connected to Lucian Ashford. Mei Lin had walked away, had chosen mortality and aging and eventual death over the strange half-life of being loved by something that could not age with her. Maya wondered if that had been courage or cowardice, strength or fear, and she could not decide which because both answers felt true. The knock came at 1 in the morning when Maya was still reading, having moved on to the 1850 journal and gotten lost in Mei Lin's descriptions of San Francisco in its gold rush years, the city wild and violent and full of people seeking fortune. Maya's head jerked up at the sound, and she crossed to the door, pressing her ear against the wood. "Miss Chen," a woman's voice said from the hallway, smooth and cultured with an accent that might have been Russian or Eastern European. "I'm Katerina. I serve on the council with Lucien. May I come in?" Maya stepped back from the door as if it had burned her because she remembered Lucien's warning, his specific instruction not to invite anyone inside, and she understood that this was a test, the first of what would probably be many attempts to see if she would break the rules that were meant to protect her. "I'm not here to harm you," Katerina continued, her voice carrying easily through the door. "I just want to understand what Lucien is protecting. Surely you're curious about what you've stepped into." Maya was curious, desperately so, but she had learned young that curiosity without caution was how people ended up hurt or dead or worse. And she pressed her palm flat against the door as if she could feel the threat on the other side. "He said not to let anyone in," Maya called through the wood, keeping her voice steady even though her heart was racing. There was a pause and then Katerina laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of glass. "He's kept you very isolated, hasn't he? Ask yourself why. What is he hiding?" Before Maya could formulate a response, another voice cut through the hallway, Lucien's voice cold and sharp in a way Maya had not heard before. "Katerina. Article 12. Guessed right. Leave." The temperature in the hallway seemed to drop, and Maya heard the rustle of fabric as Katerina presumably turned to face Lucien. "Of course," Katerina said, all warmth gone from her tone. "I was just introducing myself." Her heels clicked away down the corridor, the sound fading into distance, and then Lucien knocked softly on the door. "It's me. You can open it." Maya unlocked the door and pulled it open, and Lucien stood in the hallway looking tired in a way that seemed wrong for something that did not need sleep, shadows under his eyes that had not been there earlier. "She'll try again," he said, stepping inside when Maya moved back to give him space. "More subtly next time." Maya closed the door and locked it, and turned to face him, anger rising hot in her throat because she was tired of half-explanations and warnings about dangers she could not see or understand. "What is she talking about?" Maya demanded. "What are you hiding?" Lucien's eyes went to the journals on the desk, to the open glass case and the volume Maya had been reading, and something in his expression shifted into resignation. "The journals. You've been reading them." Maya crossed her arms over her chest, defensive. "You loved her. Mei Lin, you loved her and she left you." Lucien was quiet for a long moment, and then he moved to the windows, looking out at the city as if it held answers he had been seeking for centuries. "Yes," he said simply, and there was no attempt to deny or deflect. "And when she died in 1892, I swore I'd protect her bloodline because it was all I had left of her. But I didn't expect one of her descendants to look exactly like her, to sound like her, to be—" He stopped, his jaw tightening as if he was physically restraining the words that wanted to come next. "I'm not hiding anything. I'm trying not to repeat the past." Maya felt something in her chest crack open because she understood then that Lucien was not just protecting her out of obligation or ancient promise, but out of grief, out of the weight of loving someone who had chosen to leave rather than watch themselves diminish while he remained unchanged. She moved to stand beside him at the window, and they looked out at the city together. Two people separated by fundamental biology, but connected by the choices of a woman who had been dead for over a century. "I'm not her," Maya said quietly. "I know," Lucien replied, but he did not look at her, and Maya could not tell if that was relief or regret in his voice. The next day, Lucien took Maya to a vampire social event, a gallery opening on one of the Ashford Tower's lower floors, and he explained in the elevator that this was necessary, a calculated move to show the council that he was not ashamed of their connection and would not be cowed into hiding her away like a guilty secret. If he hid her, they would interpret it as weakness, as evidence that the connection compromised him in ways that made him unreliable. If he presented her publicly, declared her his guest under blood right protection, it showed strength and confidence that he could manage both his obligations to her and his responsibilities to vampire society. Maya had dressed in the clothes she found in the suite, black pants and a deep green shirt that fit her perfectly, and she wondered again who had selected them and how they had known her size. The gallery space was elegant and modern, white walls and track lighting illuminating paintings and sculptures that ranged from classical to contemporary, and as they entered, Maya saw that the room was full of vampires, perhaps 30 of them, all dressed in expensive formal wear and holding glasses of red wine that she suspected was not actually wine. Human art on the walls, Lucian murmured as they moved into the space, donated by vampire patrons over the years. Some of it is quite valuable. Maya realized as they walked that she was the only living human in the room, the only person whose heart beat and whose breath came in visible movements of her chest, and the awareness made her skin prickle with instinctive wariness. Every vampire they passed turned to look at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to hunger to something that might have been pity, and Lucian kept her at his side, one hand resting lightly on her lower back as he introduced her to various council members and other powerful vampires. "Maya Chen," he would say, his voice carrying clear authority. "My guest under blood right protection." The phrase seemed to mean something because each vampire who heard it would nod with what looked like understanding and respect, though Maya also caught flickers of other emotions, calculation and suspicion, and in some cases barely concealed contempt. Katerina appeared halfway through the event, gliding across the floor in a dress that looked like it cost more than Maya's entire education, and she stopped in front of them with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "You must be very special," Katerina said, directing her words to Maya, but watching Lucienne. "Lucienne hasn't taken a human under protection in over a century." Maya felt Lucian tense beside her, but she kept her own expression neutral, channeling every ounce of stubborn defiance she had inherited from generations of Chen women who had survived worse than vampire politics. "Or maybe he just keeps his promises," Maya replied, holding Katerina's gaze without flinching. Katerina's smile widened into something sharper, more genuine. "We'll see," she said, and then she drifted away to join another cluster of vampires, leaving Maya and Lucienne standing alone in a room full of predators who were all watching to see what would happen next. Maya woke to pale morning light filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the suite, and for a moment she forgot where she was, her mind still caught in the half-dream state where her grandmother's apartment and the Ashford Tower blended into one impossible space. Then she saw the Victorian furniture and the glass-encased journals on the desk, and memory returned with the weight of stones settling in her chest. She sat up and was about to swing her legs out of bed when she noticed something white on the floor near the door, a folded piece of paper that had been slid underneath while she slept. Maya crossed the room barefoot and picked up the paper, unfolding it to reveal handwriting that was elegant and precise, each letter formed with the kind of penmanship that suggested either great age or deliberate affectation. "Your grandmother didn't die of natural causes," the note read, and there was no signature, no indication of who had written it or how they had gotten close enough to her door to deliver it. "Ask Lucian who was there." Maya felt cold spread through her body like water freezing in her veins because her grandmother had died 3 months ago of what the doctors said was heart failure. A peaceful death in her sleep that Maya had grieved but accepted as the natural end of a long life. The suggestion that there was more to it, that Lucienne had been involved somehow, made Maya's hands shake with anger and fear in equal measure. She dressed quickly and left her suite, walking 3 doors down the hallway to where Lucian had said he was staying, and she pounded on his door with her good hand, her broken arm throbbing in its cast. The door opened almost immediately, and Lucian stood there looking like he had not slept either, still wearing the same clothes from the gallery event the night before. and his eyes went to the paper in Maya's hand with an expression that confirmed her worst suspicions. "Were you there when my grandmother died?" Maya demanded, her voice louder than she intended, echoing in the quiet hallway. Lucien's pause was answer enough, a hesitation that lasted perhaps 2 seconds but felt like an eternity, and Maya felt betrayal cut through her anger, like a blade finding the space between ribs. "You were watching her too," Maya said, pushing past him into his suite, which was similar to hers, but darker, furnished in deep woods and leather with fewer windows. "For how long?" Lucien closed the door and turned to face her, and his expression was weary, in a way that made him look every one of his 207 years. "I visited her once a year," he said quietly, "on the anniversary of Mei Lin's death." "Your grandmother knew. She allowed it." Maya wanted to scream, wanted to break something, but instead she stood in the middle of his suite with her fists clenched and demanded the truth. "The last time I saw her," Lucien continued, 3 weeks before she passed, she told me you were about to turn 24. She gave me the locket and said when the time comes, protect her better than you protected me." Maya's anger faltered because she remembered the locket appearing in her grandmother's things, remembered finding it in the box of papers and photographs she had inherited, but she had assumed it was just another family heirloom with no particular significance. "What does that mean?" Maya asked, her voice dropping to something quieter and more dangerous. "Protect her from what?" Lucien moved to the windows and looked out at the city below, and when he spoke his voice carried the weight of old grief. "From the same thing that killed Mei Lin, another vampire who wanted to use her to control me." The explanation came in fragments, pieces of a story that Lucien clearly did not want to tell, but could not avoid any longer. He described a vampire named Dorian, who had been a rival on the council in the late 19th century, someone who saw Lucien's oath to Mei Lin as a weakness that could be exploited. Maya listened as Lucien painted the scene with words. 1892, Mei Lin elderly and frail in her home in San Francisco's Chinatown, and Dorian arriving with an offer that was really a threat. "Renounce the blood oath," Dorian had said, "and I'll let her die peacefully of old age. Refuse, and I'll turn her into a vampire against her will, make her immortal but monstrous, trapped forever in a body that will hunger for blood and never know peace." Lucien had refused because blood oaths could not be renounced, could not be bargained away or dismissed, and Dorian had attacked Mei Lin in retaliation. Lucien had arrived too late, finding Mei Lin dying from wounds that would have been survivable for a vampire, but were fatal for a human her age. She had made him promise not to take revenge because it would start a war between council factions, would spill blood across the city and destroy everything the vampire community had built in America. She had died in his arms while he held her and could do nothing to save her because she had refused to be turned, had chosen death over immortality as a monster. Dorian was executed by the council 20 years later for unrelated crimes, Lucien said, still looking out the window as if he could not bear to meet Maya's eyes. But the tactic worked. I was controlled by my oath. I couldn't act without risking Mei Lin's suffering. That's what Katerina is doing now. She's reminding me that you're leverage. Maya absorbed this information and felt the pattern of it settle into place, like puzzle pieces forming a picture she did not want to see. "So as long as I'm under your protection, I'm a target," she said slowly. "And as long as I'm a target, you're trapped." Lucien turned from the window and looked at her directly, and the expression on his face was answer enough. "Yes," he said simply. Maya paced across the suite, her mind racing through possibilities and implications. And then she stopped and faced him with a question that had been forming since she first read Mei Lin's journals. "Then we end the pact. You said blood oaths transfer through bloodlines. How do we break it?" Lucien went very still, and something that might have been fear or hope flickered across his features. "You can't," he said, his voice flat. "Only death breaks a blood oath." Maya felt her pulse quicken, but she kept her voice steady. "Whose death? Yours or mine?" Lucien's eyes darkened. And when he answered, his voice carried a weight that made the air feel heavy. Either. The baldness of it should have frightened Maya, but instead it clarified something, made the situation simple in a way that cut through all the politics and history and ancient promises. If those were the only two options, death or continued danger, then they needed a third option, something that neither Lucienne nor Katerina nor the council had considered. The pact says you have to protect me until I'm no longer in danger, Maya said, the plan forming even as she spoke. What if we eliminate the danger? What if we take down Katerina and anyone else who sees me as leverage? Lucienne stared at her as if she had suggested they burn down the Ashford Tower. That's a war, he said. You've fought wars before, Maya countered, and she saw something shift in his expression. Recognition or respect, or both. You sound like Mei Lin, Lucian said quietly. Good, Maya replied. Maybe she was right to trust you. The next hours passed in a blur of activity as Lucian began calling in debts and reaching out to allies that Maya had not known existed. Dr. Samir arrived first. Her medical bag replaced with a leather satchel that clinked with glass vials and metal instruments Maya did not want to examine too closely. A vampire named Julian appeared next, broad-shouldered and scarred with eyes that had seen combat, and he greeted Lucian with the easy familiarity of someone who had fought beside him and trusted him absolutely. He came out of retirement for this, Lucian explained to Maya, and Julian just shrugged and said he owed Lucian his life 3 times over, and one more fight would hardly make a difference. The most surprising ally was Kira, the werewolf clan leader, who had been mentioned in the meeting Lucian missed to save Maya. She arrived in human form, tall and athletic with silver streaks in her dark hair, and she brought information about Katerina's movements and plans that made Maya's stomach drop. Katerina has been building a case to invoke Article 7, Kira said, spreading papers across Lucian's desk that showed dates and incidents and witness statements. Strip you of your autonomy at the next council session in 3 days. Her evidence is your repeated prioritization of a human over vampire law. Maya looked at the papers and saw her own name mentioned multiple times, saw references to the apartment incident with Derek, to the gallery event, to Lucian's refusal to attend werewolf negotiations, and she understood that every choice Lucian had made to protect her had been documented and weaponized against him. The countermove that Lucian proposed was risky to the point of seeming suicidal, but it was also the only legal option they had within vampire law. He would present Maya at the council session and invoke the ancient right of display, a law that dated back to the earliest days of vampire society in Europe, and allowed a vampire to prove a human was under legitimate protection, rather than coercion or manipulation. If the council accepted the right of display, the blood oath would be legally recognized, and Katerina could not challenge it without violating fundamental vampire law. If they rejected it, Lucian would lose his seat on the council and possibly his life, depending on how threatened they felt by his continued existence. Maya's role in this plan was central and terrifying because she would have to testify in front of the council, stand before the most powerful vampires in the city, and convince them she was there willingly, that she understood what she was doing and accepted the risks. Julian looked skeptical when Lucian explained this part. She's human, he said bluntly. They'll tear her apart with questions. They'll probe for any sign of coercion or blood influence. She needs to be perfect. Then we make her perfect, Lucienne said, and for the next 2 days he trained Maya in vampire etiquette and protocol with an intensity that left her exhausted and overwhelmed. He taught her how to address council elders, the specific titles and forms of respect that vampire society demanded. He taught her how to stand without showing fear, how to meet their eyes without challenge or submission, how to use the Chen family history as armor that proved her lineage had survived vampire attention for nearly 2 centuries. Dr. Samir helped by playing the role of hostile questioner, throwing accusations and implications at Maya until she could respond without flinching or hesitating. You're a liability, Dr. Samir would say, her voice cold. You're leverage that will get Lucian killed. Why should we allow you to live? Because I'm here by choice, Maya would answer, and because the blood oath is legitimate whether you recognize it or not. Over and over until the words became automatic, until Maya could say them with conviction that felt real even when she was shaking with fear inside. Late at night, the day before the council session, Maya sat in Lucian's suite surrounded by papers and notes, and the detritus of their planning, and she asked the question that had been haunting her since they decided on this course of action. If this goes wrong, what happens to you? Lucian was standing by the window as he often did, silhouetted against the city lights, and he did not turn when he answered. I'll be bound, stripped of power, possibly executed if they rule I've broken covenant law. Maya felt her chest tighten because the casual way he said it made it worse somehow, made it clear that he had accepted this possibility and decided it was worth the risk. And you're risking that for me because of a promise you made to my great-great-great-grandmother, she said, her voice sharper than she intended. Lucian did turn then, crossing the room to stand in front of her, and his dark eyes searched her face as if looking for something he had lost and found again. At first, yes, he said, his voice low and honest in a way she had not heard before. But now. He trailed off, and the silence stretched between them heavy with implications and possibilities that neither of them had acknowledged until this moment. Now it's more than that, Maya finished for him, her heart beating fast enough that she wondered if he could hear it. Yes, Lucian said simply, and the word hung in the air between them like a confession, or a promise, or both. They were standing close enough that Maya could have reached out and touched him, could have closed the distance that remained between them, and she lifted her good hand and placed it on his chest, over where his heart should have beaten. She could not feel a heartbeat, could not feel the warm pulse of blood that would have confirmed life, but she felt the tension in him, felt the way he held himself rigid as if one wrong move would shatter whatever fragile thing was building between them. He pulled back suddenly, stepping away with visible effort, and when he spoke his voice was rough. Not until you're safe. Not until you have a choice that isn't wrapped up in survival and blood oaths. Maya felt frustration rise hot in her throat, but she also understood what he was saying, understood that anything that happened between them now would be tainted by obligation and fear, and the knowledge that she needed him to survive. Then let's make sure I survive to have that choice, she said, and Lucien's expression shifted into something that might have been hope or determination or the kind of fierce protectiveness that came from caring about someone more than was wise or safe. They spent the rest of the night preparing, going over Maya's testimony and the arguments Lucien would present to the council, and when dawn began to lighten the sky outside the windows, Maya finally returned to her own suite to try to sleep for a few hours before the session that would determine whether she lived or died and whether Lucien remained free or became a prisoner of the very laws he had served for over a century. The chamber beneath the Ashford Tower existed in a space that felt removed from the modern world above, carved from stone that predated the city itself, and lit by candles whose flames cast shadows that moved like living things across walls marked with symbols Maya could not read. 12 vampire elders sat in a semicircle on thrones that looked medieval, each one positioned to create a curved wall of judgment that faced the center of the room, where Maya stood beside Lucien with her heart beating so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Katerina sat at the center of the semicircle, elevated slightly above the others, and her expression was one of cold satisfaction, as if she had already won this battle before it began. Lucien Ashford has violated the principle of detachment, Katerina said, her voice carrying through the chamber with the kind of authority that came from centuries of command. He has bound himself to a human through an archaic blood oath and used council resources to protect her. This makes him a liability to our community and to the careful balance we maintain with the mortal world. Maya felt the weight of 12 pairs of eyes turned to her, some curious, some hostile, some merely calculating as if she were a problem to be solved rather than a person to be considered. Lucien stepped forward, and his voice when he spoke was steady and formal in a way Maya had not heard before, every word chosen with the precision of someone who understood that lives hung on the outcome of this conversation. I invoke the right of display, he said, and produced from his jacket a leather portfolio that contained documents Maya recognized from the Ashford archives. He presented Maylin's testimony from 1847, the original scroll written in Chinese and English that detailed the blood oath and its terms. He presented the blood oath scroll itself, preserved under glass, the paper yellowed with age, but the writing still clear enough to read. And then he gestured to Maya and said, "And I present Maya Chen herself, descendant of the bloodline I swore to protect, here of her own free will to testify to the legitimacy of this oath." Maya stepped forward because they had practiced this, had rehearsed the movements and the words until they felt almost natural, but standing in front of the council with their ancient eyes examining her made everything she had prepared feel inadequate and small. "I didn't ask for this," Maya began, her voice shaking slightly but growing stronger as she continued. "I didn't know about the oath until 2 weeks ago when someone tried to kill me and Lucian saved my life. But he honored his word. He saved my life when he had no obligation beyond a promise made nearly 200 years ago to my ancestor. And I'm here to tell you that I'm not being coerced. I'm not under any kind of blood influence or manipulation. I'm here because I choose to be." She met the eyes of each elder as she spoke, remembering Lucien's training about not showing fear or submission, about standing as someone who had the right to be heard. One of the elders, an ancient-looking vampire with white hair and eyes like chips of ice, leaned forward with interest. "And what do you understand about what it means to be under vampire protection?" he asked, his voice soft but sharp. Maya took a breath and answered with the words she and Lucian had prepared. "I understand that it means I'm always going to be a target for anyone who wants to use me as leverage against Lucian. I understand that it means my life is no longer entirely my own because I'm connected to vampire politics and power structures I barely understand. I understand that it means I might die young because of something I inherited rather than something I chose. But I also understand that Lucian has kept his word for nearly 2 centuries, and that means something in a world where people break promises as easily as breathing." Katerina's expression had not changed, but Maya saw something flicker in her eyes, irritation or respect or both. "And if we asked you to renounce his protection," Katerina said, leaning forward slightly, "to walk away and free him from the oath and all the complications it brings, what would you say?" Maya had known this question was coming because Lucian had warned her it was the most dangerous one, the one designed to split them apart by making it seem like the merciful choice. "I would," Maya said clearly, and she heard Lucien's sharp intake of breath beside her even though they had discussed this answer. "If that's what he wanted. But you'd have to ask him, not me." The chamber fell silent, and Maya felt the attention shift from her to Lucian like a physical weight moving through the air. Katerina's smile was thin and cold. "Would you accept her renunciation?" she asked Lucian, and every word was a trap. "Even if it meant keeping your power and your position on this council. Even if it meant removing the one weakness your enemies can exploit." Lucien did not hesitate, and his voice when he answered carried the weight of absolute conviction. "No," he said simply. Katerina leaned back in her throne, and her expression shifted to something like triumph. "So you admit that you prioritize this human over your duties to the council," she said. "You admit that you would sacrifice your position, and possibly your life for a mortal who will be dead in 60 years, regardless of what we decide here." Lucian met her eyes, and Maya saw something in his face that was both ancient and newly determined. "I swore to protect her bloodline," he said. "I won't break that oath to satisfy your politics or your fear that I might care about something more than power." The silence that followed was absolute, 12 elders regarding Lucien with expressions that ranged from disapproval to grudging respect, and Maya realized that this moment was the hinge point, the place where everything would turn one direction or another. The council's deliberation happened in closed session, and Maya and Lucien were escorted to a waiting chamber that was smaller and less intimidating than the main hall, but still felt oppressive with its stone walls and lack of windows. Maya sat on a bench that was probably older than her entire family line and tried to control her shaking hands, while Lucian stood motionless near the door with his face unreadable. "What are they going to do?" Maya asked finally, unable to bear the silence. "Vote," Lucian answered without looking at her. "If 7 of the 12 rule in my favor, the oath is recognized and you're protected under council law. If not..." He did not finish the sentence, and Maya did not ask him to because she understood the implications well enough. The wait stretched into 20 minutes that felt like hours, time moving with the thick slowness of honey or blood, and Maya counted her heartbeats and tried not to think about what would happen if the vote went against them. When the door finally opened and they were summoned back to the chamber, Maya's legs felt weak, but she forced herself to walk steadily, to show no fear even though terror was a live thing clawing at her insides. The 12 elders were seated again in their semicircle, and their faces revealed nothing, centuries of practice at concealing emotion, making them unreadable as carved stone. Julian, the vampire who had come out of retirement to help Lucian, stood and spoke with formal gravity. "We recognize the blood oath as legitimate," he said, and Maya felt relief flood through her so intensely she thought she might collapse. "Maya Chen is under council protection as an honored guest of Lucien Ashford. Any action against her will be considered an action against this council and will be punished accordingly." But Julian was not finished, and his next words carried the sharp edge of conditions and limitations. "However," he continued, "the oath must be monitored to ensure it is not being exploited or manipulated. Lucienne will report to us monthly on her status and well-being, and if at any time we determine she is being used against him, or that the oath is creating unacceptable risk to our community, we reserve the right to relocate her for her own safety." Maya understood the translation immediately, because Lucian had taught her to read vampire politics like a second language. They were letting him keep her, but they were watching, ready to separate them the moment it became convenient or necessary. Katerina's expression was one of barely concealed fury, her jaw tight and her eyes promising that this battle might be won, but the war was far from over. Back at the suite, Maya collapsed onto the couch and felt the adrenaline that had been holding her upright for the past 3 hours drain away, leaving her shaking and exhausted. Lucian poured her a drink from a cabinet she had not noticed before, whiskey that was smooth and expensive and clearly kept for human guests since he did not drink it himself. Maya laughed and the sound came out half hysterical, a release of tension that bordered on tears. "I just testified in front of a vampire council," she said, and the absurdity of it hit her all over again. "You did well," Lucian said, sitting across from her in the chair by the window, and his voice carried genuine pride. "I was terrified," Maya admitted, taking a long drink that burned going down, but settled some of the shaking in her hands. "I know," Lucian said quietly. "So was I." The admission surprised Maya because she had not seen fear in him, had seen only the same stone-steady composure he always showed. "I thought they'd take you," he continued, and now she could hear the tension beneath his words. "Use the relocation clause immediately. Separate us just to prove they could." "Would you have let them?" Maya asked, meeting his eyes across the space between them. "No," Lucian said, and the single word carried the weight of absolute commitment. The danger has passed for now, but the weight of what happened settled between them like sediment in water, heavy and real. They were bound not just by the oath that had brought them together, but by the choice they had made in the council chamber, the choice to prioritize each other over safety or political convenience. "What happens now?" Maya asked, setting down her empty glass. "You go back to your life," Lucian said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I monitor from a distance. The council is satisfied." "And if I don't want distance," Maya said, and saw surprise flicker across Lucian's face. The truth, when Lucian spoke, it was harder than Maya expected, because he laid out the reality without softening it or making it easier to accept. "If you stay close to me, you'll always be in this world," he said. "Vampire politics and power struggles and danger from people like Katerina, who see you as leverage or weakness. Your life will never be entirely normal again. You'll age while I stay the same. You'll die while I continue. That's the cost of choosing this. Maya thought about Mei Lin's journals, about the woman who had loved Lucian and left him because she could not bear being temporary in the face of his immortality. I've read Mei Lin's journals, Maya said slowly. I know how this story went the first time. She left because she was afraid of being temporary. But maybe that's not the worst thing. Maybe temporary is enough. Lucien crossed the room and knelt in front of her so they were at eye level, and his dark eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her feel seen in a way that was both terrifying and exhilarating. I've had centuries, he said, his voice low and rough. I don't want temporary, but I'll take what you're willing to give. Maya leaned in, and he met her halfway, and when their lips touched, it was not the desperate, hungry kiss of people who thought they might die, but the deliberate, careful kiss of people who were choosing each other with full knowledge of what that choice meant. His hand came up to cup her face, and she felt the coolness of his skin against hers, felt the absence of pulse or heartbeat, but also felt the way he held her like something precious and irreplaceable. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. Well, Maya was breathing hard, and Lucian was motionless in that vampire way, but his eyes were dark with want, and something deeper. They did not solve everything in that moment, because the council was still watching, and Katerina was still a threat, and the future was uncertain in ways that made planning difficult. But for now, Maya stayed, moving her things from her grandmother's apartment into the suite at the Ashford Tower, keeping her job but working remotely from the safety of vampire-protected space, learning the rules and customs of the vampire world, not as a victim or a pawn, but as a participant who had chosen to be there. 6 months later, Maya sat at her desk in the suite working on her laptop, with her fully healed arm typing notes for a project that was due at the end of the week. The locket that had belonged to Mei Lin hung around her neck, warm against her skin from her body heat, a reminder of the history that had brought her here and the choices that had kept her. Lucien was reading by the window in the same position he had occupied that first night when Maya had been too afraid to sleep, and the domesticity of it struck her sometimes with surprising force. They had built something here in the space between danger and safety, something that looked almost normal if you ignored the fact that one of them did not age and the other would eventually die. The knock on the door was soft and controlled, and Maya looked up from her laptop with mild curiosity. "Are you expecting someone?" she asked Lucien. "No," he answered, and now there was tension in his voice, the subtle shift that meant he was alert to potential danger. Maya stood and crossed to the door because she was not afraid anymore, or at least not afraid in the way she had been 6 months ago, when every vampire was a threat and every shadow held danger. She opened the door to find a young woman standing in the hallway. Asian features and nervous energy and hands that clutched a small object. "My name is Lily Chen," the woman said, her voice shaking slightly. "My grandmother just died. She told me to find Lucian Ashford. She said there's a blood oath, and I need help." Maya felt her heart stop for a moment because she recognized the object in Lily's hands, a locket identical to the one around Maya's own neck. She turned to look at Lucian, who had risen from his chair and was standing completely still with an expression Maya could not quite read. "The Chen bloodline continues," he said quietly, and Maya understood what that meant. Another generation, another promise, another descendant who would need protection from a world she did not yet understand. But this time Maya was part of it, not just the protected, but the protector. Someone who could help guide Lily through what was coming. She stepped aside and gestured for Lily to enter, her voice steady and sure. "Come in," Maya said. "We'll explain everything." The three of them stood in the suite with centuries of history behind them and an uncertain future ahead, the weight of promises made and kept passing forward to the next generation, and Maya reached for Lucien's hand and found it waiting for hers.